Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be talking about Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid by Jimmy Carter. Now, I've actually done a longer review of this one on the Stephen Heiner channel, somewhat early in my Palestine Bookshelf journey, you might say. I know a lot more now, and I don't want to double cover what I covered there. I talked a lot more about the conditions of apartheid. He mentioned in there, talking about the different statuses of Palestinians, whether they are in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, in Gaza, or if they are Palestinian citizens of Israel, and how there are gates to prevent people from moving up that hierarchy, but nothing to stop them from moving down the hierarchy. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to reference that video. I'll put a link to it in the description as well as a card for it. Today, I'm just going to talk about a few things. It's relevant. President Carter died recently. Just to talk about some of his ideas and how he was pilloried for this book simply for speaking up on behalf of the Palestinians. Remember, that's anti-Semitic to even do that, even though he's a person who helped mediate a peace treaty with the Israelis. So he would hardly be considered a rabid pro-Palestinian person, but I think he's just someone who's recognized common sense, and he got attacked for that. So I'm going to start with just a basic immigration statistic, which he mentions in passing in an early chapter. Although exact data are not available, it is estimated that in 1880 there were only 30,000 Jews in Palestine, scattered among 600,000 Muslims and Christian Arabs. By 1930, their numbers had grown to more than 150,000. So in that 50-year time span, they had 5x'd their population. And that was a big bone of contention, and people started to realize that. Remember that there had always been Jews living in Palestine, but they were just not living there in a major number, and they lived in peace with their Muslim and Christian neighbors. So here are some of the conditions that Carter puts forward, which, as I said, that when I first reviewed this book, I don't think I would have had the ability to attack different aspects of what he's saying here, even though what he's saying when I first read it probably sounded quite reasonable. So he says, the three most basic premises are quite clear for dealing with peace talks. He says, first, Israel's right to exist within recognized borders and to live in peace must be accepted by Palestinians and all other neighbors. So if we isolate just the last portion of this, I don't think anyone could really oppose this idea. Live in peace and must be accepted by Palestinians and all other neighbors. People have a right to live in peace, and people have a right to expect that of their neighbors. Israel's right to exist within recognized borders. So let's start with right to exist. Countries exist. Whether they have a right to exist is a different issue. So this is a sentiment both of Noam Chomsky and Francesca Albanese. No country really has a right to exist. Humans have a right to life, you might say, but countries don't have a right. Countries come and go. No one mourns for it. When the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary went away, they didn't say, well, the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary has a right to exist. When the Ottoman Empire went away, it went away. The idea of a country possessing a right to exist is nebulous, and I would argue specious. So Israel's right to exist, here's the thing, within recognized borders, Israel doesn't have any recognized borders, either internally or externally. They just occupy whatever they want. Syria recently had a government collapse, and they went in and occupied more land in Syria. That's Israel's official policy. They occupy land whenever it's available. And by available, it's they want it, and no one's there to defend it, other than unarmed men, women, and children. So Israel's right to exist, this is a loaded phrase. No country really has the right to exist. Within recognized borders, Israel doesn't have any recognized borders. So but what I think President Carter is trying to say is there has to be a state that has some recognizable borders in order for there to be a lasting peace. That's true. What he doesn't parse here is Israel as a Jewish Zionist project is a non-starter for this condition. So if you say the Jewish Zionist project's right to exist within recognized borders, that's a non-starter. And I think that's something that Carter was potentially not willing to take on in so explicit a manner, not because he was afraid, but because he might not have really seen what the issue was. Number two, the killing of non-combatants in Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon by bombs, missile attacks, assassinations, or other acts of violence cannot be condoned. Now, this seems to be applying equally to all parties. So people in Israel, so from the IDF, Palestine, so people from the resistance, and Lebanon, people from Hezbollah. But if we look at the simple math of the issue, the people who have done the most killing of non-combatants by bombs, missile attacks, assassination, and other acts of violence have not been the Palestinians or the Lebanese. It's been the Israelis. And it's not close. It isn't like, oh, it's 50-50 or it's 60-40. It's something like 80 or 90% of the killing, just by numbers, again, just look at the numbers, has been done by the IDF. So this statement makes it sound like the traditional both sides argument, which is lazy and inaccurate. Third point, Palestinians must live in peace and dignity in their own land as specified by international law. This is all sounding good, unless modified by good faith negotiations with Israel. This is a really strange clause. The statement doesn't need anything else. If you just say Palestinians must live in peace and dignity in their own land as specified by international law, that's sufficient. When you say unless modified by good faith negotiations with Israel, why would they want to modify their ability to live in peace and dignity in their own land? The other problem is this joke that there's ever been any good faith negotiations with Israel. Israel is always willing to accept something for a specific time until the time is propitious for them to carry out their plans. That's part of why they were so excited about the Peel Commission, even though it reduced the Jewish state to a very small idea. And again, this was in theory. The Peel Commission was never implemented. The Peel Commission report, but it introduced the idea of transfer, and they loved that, and they loved that someone else had said it. So they said, okay, well now we could get the ball rolling on population transfer. And well, the British said it, so I mean we could get going on it ourselves. So when you say good faith negotiations with Israel, it would imply that they are willing to give up a supremacist Zionist project. And not in Jimmy Carter's time, when this book was written in the mid-aughts, and to the present day, that's not clear that that's ever going to be a possibility. So remember that Carter had access, not only, interestingly enough, he was going to Israel when he was even governor of Georgia, but he had access to a lot of different officials. And then when he became president, he got to speak to heads of state. And here he's discussing something he spoke about with Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father. And I talked about this in my first book review on this. But here I just want to reiterate a small portion of what he talked about. Assad stressed to me that Israel was admitted to the United Nations in 1949 with the clear proviso that Palestinian refugees would be allowed to return to their homeland or be fully compensated for their lost property. Prior to 1967, he said, Israel was steadily forcing additional Arab inhabitants from their small remaining territory in violation of UN agreements that the Israelis had sworn to honor, and he claimed that they initiated the 1967 war in order to take even more Arab land. Remember, that's always the project of Greater Israel: more land, fewer Arabs. And if someone like Benny Morris is going to say, well, that was never written down, so I don't have to have it written down. Just look at your actions. Actions speak louder than words in any language, including Hebrew. And we can look at the actions, and we don't have to worry about the words that Benny Morris is going to try to harp on. So what happens under Clinton is more settlements. As President Clinton made efforts to promote peace, there was a 90% growth in the number of settlers in the occupied territories, with the greatest increase during the administration of Prime Minister Ehud Barak. So, and here America to this day, it's American policy that these settlements are illegal, but the way that America reacts to that and says, oh, Israel, that's so bad. And that's it. There's no real punishment behind that. By the end of the year 2000, Israeli settlers in the West Bank and Gaza numbered 225,000. The best offer to the Palestinians by Clinton, not Barak, had been to withdraw 20% of the settlers, leaving more than 180,000 in 209 settlements, covering about 10% of the occupied land, including land to be leased and portions of the Jordan River Valley and East Jerusalem. And remember, this book is from 2007. Those numbers are way higher now. We're talking about 800,000 to 1 million settlers, and taking much more of the land in such a way to ever strangle the possibility of a Palestinian state. So what's the reaction to this? As the Arab nations look at the state of play, they come up with their own peace proposal. Most Arab regimes have accepted the permanent existence of Israel as indisputable fact and are no longer calling for an end to the State of Israel, having contrived a common statement at an Arab summit in 2002 that offers peace and normal relations with Israel for its withdrawal from all Arab territories occupied since 1967, its acceptance of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and its agreement to a just solution of the Palestinian refugee problem. That's all reasonable. The thing is, those are not acceptable conditions for Israel, so it's a non-starter. So even though the Arabs are willing to say, we will recognize the state of Israel, we will normalize relations, but you have to withdraw to the pre-67 borders, you have to allow the capital of the state to be East Jerusalem, and you have to deal with the refugee problem. This is a non-starter, and that's when we go back to the idea of, all right, well, if what the Arabs propose is a non-starter, well, what about what the Americans proposed? And here at the time, there was, in 2003, a roadmap that was proposed under the Bush administration. And it was announced by UN Secretary General Kofi Annan on behalf of the US, the United Nations, Russia, and the European Union. This was known as the Quartet. Such a settlement, negotiated between the parties, will result in the emergence of an independent, democratic Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel and its other neighbors. The settlement will end the occupation that began in 1967, based on the Madrid Conference Terms of Reference and the principle of land for peace. UN Security Council Resolutions 242, 338, and 1397, agreements previously reached by the parties, and the Arab Initiative proposed by Saudi Crown Prince Abdullah and endorsed by the Arab Summit in Beirut. How did the Israelis respond to this? They gave 14 basically objections that gutted the roadmap, and Carter highlights just 6 of them. So I'm going to read 6 of the 6 of the 14. The total dismantling of all militant Palestinian subgroups, collection of all illegal weapons and their destruction. 2. Cessation of incitement against Israel, but the roadmap cannot state that Israel must cease violence and incitement against the Palestinians. Israeli control over Palestine, including the entry and exit of all persons and cargo, plus its airspace and electromagnetic spectrum, that means radio, television, radar. The waiver of any right of return of refugees to Israel. No discussion of Israeli settlement in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, or the status of the Palestinian Authority and its institutions in Jerusalem. No reference to the key provisions of UN Resolution 242, again referencing refugee return. So, as you can see, Israel's not interested in a peace in which they have to give up everything. It's the Palestinians giving up everything when they have already given up most of their land. And that's part of why we are where we are. All the countries in the world can talk about a two-state solution, etc. But it doesn't matter if Israel doesn't agree. Israel's never been interested in a two-state solution. They've done it for everyone else to feel good about there being a so-called peace process, but no one in Israel who has any power, nor the population which elects the governments, is interested in a two-state solution, and they never really have been. Actions speak louder than words. You can yap to me all day you want about a two-state solution, but there have been no actions to put it forward. And even someone like Rabin, who wasn't even advocating for a state, he's on the record as saying that he gets assassinated by his own people for even proposing something to the Palestinians. So, as I say, if you'd like to get more on this book, go back to my original review on it. As I said, it's linked in the description. If you'd like to support our work, hit like, subscribe, share this. If you'd like to buy a copy of the book, there's a link to it in the description. That's one of the ways you can support this channel. Another way would be to send a PayPal or buy me a coffee. There are links for that in the description. If you'd like to support this work on an ongoing basis, consider Patreon or YouTube membership. All of these different ways that the channel gets supported, the profits go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is a wonderful charity that helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wishlist is linked below. There are books in there that I'd like to review. If you buy it for me and send it my way, you've effectively sponsored the video, and I will try to get to it in a timely manner. So consider that way of supporting the channel as well. Until next time, enjoy your reading.